I had a counselee when I was coordinating the Employee Assistance Program at Eastland years ago, and he had his master's and his PhD in chemistry. And when he came in, he was really struggling with some things. And he said, you know, when I got my bachelor's degree, I thought I knew everything. And he said, then I got my master's degree and realized I didn't know quite everything. And then I got my doctorate and I didn't realize I didn't know a doggone thing. So that's kind of been my educational journey. You know, as I thought driving over this morning with Marcy about the influences I've had in my life around this issue of reaching agreement. I can remember Dr. Gordon, a professor I had at UT in personnel management, and one of the parts of our course dealt with labor negotiations and trying to pull parties together. And Dr. Gordon was a great influence. At seminary, I had a professor of pastoral care by the name of Dr. Wayne Oates, just an incredible human being, and incredible professor that helped me learn a lot about understanding people and how to help people work through differences. And then at UT, I had a lot of good professors that watched me counsel with UT students on video. UT students will let you do anything on video, so that I would. That's what they would do, is coach me on how to help them work through issues. And so I've had a lot of good teachers, but really the best two teachers I have ever had in my life. One of them is in this room, and her name is Marcy, and she's my wife, and she was the office manager at Dr. Kazmaier's office. Some of y'all may have received shots from her. And the staff there, as I got to know her, I started dating her about 13 years ago. I married her about 12 and a half years ago because it was pretty obvious that I wanted to do that very quickly. To me, had to convince her. But as I got to know the staff there, one of the nicknames for her was the Smoozer. And they said that Marcy could make anyone happy with anything that was a complaint of a patient. You know, he could certainly have. So Marcy has this great ability through grace and kindness to.
I like that better than schmooze.
I know, that's the way I see it. She's taught me a lot about just basic human kindness, because she's the kindest person I know. My mother, who's 91, lives with us now, has lived with us for 4.5 years. And I tell people she's probably my greatest teacher. I probably have learned more from my mother than any other human being. And I've learned a lot from her. She had an important lesson when we got married. The wedding gift that she got Marcy and I when we got married was a coffee maker. Now the only thing you need to know about this story is I don't drink coffee. And so I went to Mom after I opened it up and I said, hey, you know, this is a wonderful coffee maker and great gift. But I said, you know, I don't drink coffee. And she said, hey, if you just make Marcy coffee every morning, it'll be well worth your effort, you know. And so I do that every morning. That's the first thing I do. Coffee, because my wife. So my mother taught me a lot about reaching agreement. The days go much better when I make coffee.
Very smart.
I live with 4 M's, 4 female M's. Molly is a 5-pound female Maltipoo, my mother's dog. Mia is an 85-pound golden retriever who lives inside and rules the house. And she's a female. My mother, of course, is Mom, and Marcy. So I have M and M, M and M. As long as reaching agreement is pretty easy. I just get up in the morning and say, what am I supposed to do today? And I get my Marcy. But it's pretty good life. As we talk about reaching agreement, you have a handout, and I want to focus on kind of 3 areas today, and we'll get into those. But first, I want you to kind of think about these 3 questions. On a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being great and 1 being terrible, how would you rate the outcome that you experience in a lot of situations where it's difficult in reaching agreement? You know, where it's challenging, whether it's a marriage relationship, whether it's a friendship, whether it's a work situation, whether it's a church situation. How would you typically rate the outcome of conflicts that need agreement? What would be kind of a typical number you come up with on a scale of 1 to 10?
2.
2? Yeah, so some trouble there with...
It just depends.
Yeah.
Like at work, I would put it somewhere around 8 or 9. At church, it would be somewhere around 2.
Yeah. And it's interesting, at work, you're kind of paid to do certain things and certain expectations of a line of authority. But that sometimes makes it a little bit easier to get to agreement. You know. But certainly in a volunteer type organization like the church, you know, and I was a minister in church for 10 years, so I know that that's not always easy to do. So it depends on the situation a lot of times. Yeah.
And if at work I mean, there is an expectation of a certain way of doing it, but for you, it's a two.
Right.
You know, in terms of,
oh, yeah.
you know, if somebody's
Sure.
like, okay, this is what you do,
right.
no matter what.
Yeah, and the reason I pose this question is that when you're looking at reaching an agreement, you want to come out with a solution that everybody looks at and says, wow, I had no idea we would get to that. Isn't that incredible? That's beyond what I expected us to get to. Boy, I am so happy with that, and everyone else is so happy with it. And that's ideal, but that's achievable. But that's what you want, is to say, as we think about reaching agreement, we don't want to shoot for a 5 or 6 or a 7. We want to shoot for a 10. We really want to say, we want an outcome that everybody involved in the negotiation or in the situation is excited about. They come away from very happy. But a lot of times we don't, you know, get anywhere close to that. On a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being great and 1 being terrible, how would you rate the process for reaching agreement that you observe most of the time? When you're in a situation at work, at church, in relationships, when you think about, did we follow a logical process, or did we move through this in a way that made sense, or were we just kind of all over the place and just finally reached some kind of agreement, or, you know, did it kind of go smoothly? How would you rate that?
I'm in a Bible study group on Sunday afternoons, and we have to come up with a summary sentence, and it requires a lot of agreement
Right.
to get that, and the leader just follows a really special plan of putting up an outline on the board and us adding to that outline, and then we come together and it works.
Right.
But most of the time, there's not a process.
Right. So in that situation, due to some good leadership,
Yes.
you kind of go through it in a way that you feel good about. You don't get mad at each other, you
Right.
don't struggle, you don't get confused about why are we here, what are we doing.
Right.
But it kind of goes through it in a way to where you feel like, hey, we're moving toward an agreement that's probably going to be a pretty good one. But a lot of times that's not the case. Okay? So again, we want to come out with a great outcome. It'd also be great if we had a process, or the people who were leading that negotiation or that discussion had a good way of moving us through to where we felt like, hey, I'm being listened to, everybody's being respected, you know, we kind of are doing things in a logical, systematic way that leads us to a good place. And then finally, what were the major problems encountered in reaching agreement? As you think about the typical negotiations or conflict resolution or situations that you're involved in where you're trying to get agreement, what are some of the major problems that prevent that from being what it possibly could be?
The leader doesn't listen to comments from the group. I mean, I've had a leader tell me, no, we're not going to do it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the leader is not really a facilitator of getting agreement, but they may have their own agenda, or they may control it to where they're trying to point you in a direction themselves. And that's what a key thing. As a leader, your responsibility is to help the group get to agreement, not to do what you want them to. Right. Okay.
How stuck people are on their position.
Absolutely. And we're going to talk about the difference in positions and interests, which is really a critical thing to think about as you look at how to lead a group through a disagreement to get to agreement. So people get locked into positions that they're kind of they dug their heels in, and it's like, I'm not going to move. Okay? Other problems that you run into in reaching agreement? Yeah.
I lead a group where it's supposed to be employee run, unit-based council. And I can get major consensus out of the group, but there's one management person who always sits in and she always railroads that, and then we have to do it her way.
Right.
So sometimes having a statement where it is supposed to be a employee-run program sets people up for thinking they can do great things.
Exactly.
But
Yeah.
somebody else has another agenda that's going to railroad you.
So it's critical to set up expectations initially. I have a 91-year-old mother at home by herself, and my phone just buzzed. I don't know what my wife look and see what that is. And that's, I should have let y'all know that first.
We understand.
Yeah. Yeah,
We
we
already talked
actually
about
had.
electronic devices in the
Yeah,
first,
we
and
did.
sometimes they're
Yeah,
necessary.
we actually had,
talked
yeah, we
about
had a hard
that.
time one time
Essential.
with Martin Luther King, and I was in Morristown, so that's why I took the time to do that. Okay, so again, it's, you know, remind me. Expectations. Being clear on how we're gonna run this, and it's okay for it to run maybe that way that they try to do it, but don't make it sound like we're gonna run it differently. And that's where, at Eastman, someone told me one time about a department head they had who, basically, this was old school, probably in the 60s, but they said that he would start a discussion that they had to reach a decision, and he would go around the room and say, you know a lot about this, so you get 2 votes. You're kind of new at this, so you get 1 vote. No, you don't have a clue. And oh, by the way, I get 5 votes. And so he would do that. But he did it in a way that after a while, people kind of realized he's right. And have you ever been in situations? I've been in situations where I said, I don't really want to vote on this because I don't have a clue.
Yeah.
I really, or I don't have much at stake in this decision. So I don't deserve an equal vote with someone who's going to be impacted tremendously or who is an expert. Does that make sense? And so he had a funny little way, and people, at first, it sounded like, are you kidding me? And then you think about it more, and the people said, yeah, it kind of made sense. Now, it was his way of doing it. Now, he was the department head, so he could do things. But if you're clear on that, it's okay, you can live with it. But if you try to say, hey, we're all going to try to reach agreement, and then he imposes his will, then you got a problem. Okay? Very good. So again, we're going to talk about ways to try to help address some of those problems and others, a process that will help us more likely reach effective agreement, and how we can make sure we're shooting for the optimal outcome. The things that I thought about as after Mike called me and asked me to do this was some key things in reaching agreement. And since I'm talking to the church group, I'll use prayer. But seriously, I do that at Eastman, or I did at Eastman beforehand too. But to prepare yourself to lead that discussion. And a lot of times that means getting to know the people involved as much as possible. That means getting to know the issue as much as possible. And a lot of times as a leader or facilitator, you're not the smartest person in the room about the issue. And you don't have to be. You have to be the smartest person in the room around facilitating the discussion and unbiased and focused on helping the group reach a good decision. But you don't have to be the smartest person in the room on the issue. But you need to be knowledgeable enough to where you understand what they're talking about. So a lot of times, if you go in unprepared to lead a discussion or try to help a group reach agreement, you're going to get in trouble. So really preparing, making sure you have a process defined, we'll talk about that. And I do believe that prayer is a major part of that. If I go in with a prayerful attitude and and I'm taking care of my issues, and I'm really focused on the right things, and I'm at peace with where I am, then I'm going to be much more effective in helping that group reach agreement. If I'm conflicted and I've got a bunch of other stuff going on, and I'm not prepared to focus on this, then then I'm in trouble, and they're in trouble too. So preparation is obviously important. Purpose, and we'll talk a little bit more about this as we talk about principles, dig into these two. We're going to dig into these two things a little bit more. But being clear on why are we here. And Marcy and I were walking up and down the hall and seeing those beautiful pictures on the wall of those children, okay? And I thought to myself, if I was leading a Christian Ed committee in a discussion on an important issue around Christian education, probably the first thing I would do is say, before we start today, I want us just to walk down these halls. I want us to look at those faces. And I want us to remember that what we're here is to create a Christian education environment for those little kids that we love and that are our future. And that's what we're here to do today. It's amazing how if you got a compelling purpose or something that everybody steps back and they say, yeah, well, I was thinking about how I wanted to make sure we use this curriculum and did this, and I was going to push for that. Some of that kind of fades or falls by the wayside when you focus on really why you're here. And I've joked with people, I'm not beyond guilting people into to focusing on the right thing, and just say, now wait a minute, why because I've been in meetings that go off on tangents, and I just stop it and say, why were we here? Let's go back to our purpose, our reason that we say we're here. And let's be reminded, this is about those children. It's not about getting my way, and I don't say it that way. It's not about getting my way or just getting my idea implemented. Does that make sense? So purpose can really help you rise above a lot of the petty things that get involved a lot of times in reaching agreement. I really think, and this kind of gets, we'll talk about the principles in a moment, but it's really critical to define some guiding principles to the discussion. What are the things that are to influence this decision? If I'm leading something at Eastman, oftentimes it's about the bottom line. So one of the principles is we must optimize profitability in the outcome of this decision. You know, that's a reason, that's why Eastman's in business, one of the reasons. If I'm here, it's a totally different thing. The guiding principle around a discussion here may be different. Okay, it may be similar in some ways too, but we'll talk about the importance of having a set of principles that guide us. We'll also talk about the importance of the process. Ms. Hagan mentioned about the fact that sometimes, you know, in some groups she's been in, it was real clear of how we're going to reach agreement or how we're moving to get to that point. At other times it seems very confused. We want to make sure we have a good one. And then finally, I said praise, to really celebrate and reinforce the people who, you know, participate in the process and the outcome that you achieved and their attitudes and their involvement in the process. So it's important to bring closure, and hopefully that's something we can be very praising of. The two things I'm going to, or three things I'm going to, three or four things I'm going to use. We're going to look at 1 Corinthians to help us think about those principles. And you know, after Mike talked to me, I thought, you know, what's a good scriptural example? And the church at Corinth, I thought was a great example. And then when you dig into 1 Corinthians, you know, Paul has some incredible kind of gems of wisdom about things that can help us guide people through conflict. And then I am going to refer to something I've taught a lot at Eastman and other places, 7 habits, and a model called collaborative team skills model, which is really a model for reaching agreement. So we'll try to hustle through this. And what time am I supposed to stop, Susie? And I'll stop on the notes. Tell me. I'm good at it.
10:15.
Okay, we'll go fast.
Can you make it?
Yeah. The first thing I want to talk about is the church at Corinth. It's, if you remember that book real well, there was a lot of conflict, and basically the church was kind of dividing around people who followed Apollos and people who followed Paul. And there were a lot of division, a lot of things going on that was not very effective. Verse 18 chapter 11 says, "For first of all, when we come together in church, I hear that divisions exist among you." I partly believe it. I love that. I think Paul believed it, but he was hedging probably a little bit. And so some principles that enable reaching agreement. And I'm not going to go through the Covey model, but basically he talks about these are the 3 habits that help us move from dependence to interdependence, and then these habits help us move to interdependence. So these things really help us be interdependent. Interdependent implies we're reaching agreement. The first thing that I think that this has to do with the purpose is begin with end in mind. Make sure, and when people ask me to facilitate things, a lot of times they're not real clear on the end in mind when they come to me. And one of my major things is say, now wait a minute, what's the outcome you're looking for? What are you trying to achieve? What are you trying to reach agreement on? What's the issue? And get that clearly defined to where in the beginning we know exactly what we're shooting for. We're not shooting over here, here, and here. We're shooting right there. We're going to maintain laser focus on that purpose. And that doesn't mean you don't ever deviate from that. It may be that in the course of that discussion we realize, oops, we were wrong about the purpose. This is really absolutely critical for us to move toward now. You can redefine that, but make sure that everybody's locked on whatever you've got it defined as. And again, there's a great verse, 1 Corinthians 1:10. I'm not going to read all these, you have them, but refer to that. Paul says it's important to know what are we here to be about and what are we here to do. The next thing is act with humility. And that means be a model of humility yourself. Realize you don't have all the answers. You don't know everything that needs to be known. You can always learn from others. Others can always enhance what you bring to the table. And encourage everyone to act in the same way. Facilitate in a way that opens it up to say, you know, we're all here to learn from each other. Everyone has different ideas that are going to be good, that'll help us get to the solution. And we're going to respect that, and we're going to humbly approach this, and not with arrogance. And Paul does, you know, this passage is great at saying, you know, we don't know everything. We definitely can learn from others and benefit from them. The next principle is to think win-win, always looking for mutual benefit. Realize that as a leader, you're trying to help everyone win. You want everyone to leave thinking, this is great. I got what I believe is important, or I was able to achieve what I was seeking to achieve. And you're wanting to get to that. That's hard to do. But if you don't strive for it, you won't get there. So if you don't, shoot for mutual benefit. And so a lot of times it means asking people to say, are you happy with the solution we've reached? Are you happy with that? Is that really a win for you? And so you're really striving constantly to make this not about my way or your way or you getting what you want at sacrifice of others. We're really saying we want everyone to benefit as much as possible in this situation. And again, I worked with school systems. Now you think about school systems, you want the parents to benefit, you want the students to benefit, you want the community to benefit, you want taxpayers to benefit, you want the teachers to benefit, you want the administrators to benefit. It's a tough, tough thing to negotiate, okay? So it's not, I'm not saying it's easy, but to constantly strive to say we want everybody to walk out of this room really happy with the solution that we reached and feel like it's beneficial to them. The fourth principle that I thought about is seek first to understand, then to be understood. An example of this, and we're going to kind of get this on the process a little bit, but I was in a situation in Carolina at our plant there, and a gentleman came in. We were trying to reach a decision about how they were going to support IT at the plant, across the plant, because they had digital control systems out in the plant that they had people supporting, they had administrative things they had people supporting. They felt like they were losing a lot of synergy by not combining that. So they asked me to come down and use this model I'll show you in a moment. And one gentleman walked up to me at the very first thing. He said, Rick, I just want you to know, I will not accept a solution that comes out here, and said this. And I said, I appreciate, your passion about that. I said, the thing I would ask for you is to please just go through the process today and stay with us and try to understand other people's perspectives as much as possible and let them know yours and see where you come out at the end of the day. At lunch, he came up to me and he said, Rick, I can't hold on to that position anymore. He said, there's some things I understand now that I didn't understand before. And so you always want to say, we're here to learn. We're here to try to understand other people's positions, other people's thoughts, other people's feelings, and in doing that, be influenced where I think, oops, boy, I didn't know that. I didn't think of that. My idea won't work now as a result. Okay? And again, some good passages to support that. Great love passage from 1 Corinthians 13, 1 through 8. If you got married, you probably heard this at your wedding. No, anyway. But it's, act in love. If you can't lead a group of people and care deeply about them and how they're affected and the things that are important to them being affected, you're in trouble. And so it was hard to love some of those Eastman engineers at times. But just being honest. But but I was able to do that. Mostly not through my grace, but God's grace. But to go in and say, I'm really here to help them. I'm not here. This is not about me. This is about me walking out of this room with a bunch of people really excited and happy about reaching an agreement that they didn't think they would reach, and it's furthering their cause. And I care about what happens to them. There's a few people I always say yes to. If it's church, I usually try to always say yes to Noah Ascot. I usually try to say yes in some form because I believe in what United Way does. I believe in what your all's church does. I've been around it and observed it through the years. So, you need to, don't say yes if you can't love the people involved. Don't ever try to lead a group of people in anything unless you care deeply about them and the outcome that they are trying to achieve. Develop synergies by valuing differences. I told Bradley I use his dad as a story, as an example in my Myers-Briggs classes wherever I teach about the real strong T, and Buddy knows I'm using that story all the time. But a part of that is use ways of valuing differences, helping each other. I use Myers-Briggs a lot with groups to say, look, some of us are this way and some of us are that way. It's not good or bad. It's just different. And boy, isn't it wonderful that other people bring things to the table that I don't bring. One lady at Eastman that I really enjoyed working with was exactly the opposite of me, personality type. And she could do things that I couldn't do. She liked doing things that I didn't like doing. And we were a great team when we worked together because of that respect and value of differences. And so again, as you're leading people toward disagreement, don't see differences as a barrier, see them as a way to enable a better solution. And so you're really wanting to build on those differences, and this passage does a great job of reinforcing the importance and the value of that. The thing that someone mentioned earlier about positions, and this is really important as you facilitate disagreements, is to really try to recognize that the difference in positions, and I usually try to articulate this first to say, we're here to really talk about what we're interested in achieving, not what our position is on this. And so positions promote conflict, interests facilitate agreement. An example of a position promoting conflict, a position is something one has decided is a way to settle a conflict or a difference. It's a predetermined solution based on their perspective. Okay, and that's an important thing based on it may be the best solution, but we don't know that until we've interacted with a bunch of people around their ideas too. An example, and again, problems with positions, they're a predetermined way to solve problems. They don't understand real interests of the parties in the dispute, and they limit the creation of other options. An example that you hear a lot is an example of position. We must consolidate our schools, or we oppose consolidation. And when people come in with those positions, seldom do you see agreement. Seldom do you see anything advanced that makes things better, because you just battle it out and one side wins, so we go off and we stay consolidated. I mean, we consolidate or we stay unconsolidated. The thing you want to do is try to focus on interest. Try to encourage people to talk about interest. And interests are needs or beliefs or values that are underneath positions and behind them, and they're why something is important. And so, again, some examples of interest would be people who are interested in consolidation would focus on things like cost efficiency, educational quality, and try to stretch resources. People who are opposed to consolidation, they're focusing on community pride, they value the historic school, and educational quality. Now see, if you look at all those things, are all those things important? Yeah. See, then we can get agreement that, yeah, this is important. And oh, yeah, this is important too. Now, how could we find a solution or a position, not mine or yours, but a third alternative, as Covey talks about, that would enable us to improve all of these in some way, or do better, or optimize these as much as possible? Does that make sense? So again, you're looking at trying to get behind it. So when people state positions with me, I try to say, what are you really wanting to achieve with that position? What's the thing that really matters, or is of interest to you in relation to that? And then we get that on the table, and we try to focus on that as opposed to focusing on the position. So this is really, and we could do a lot on this, dig into this, but you know, again, just want to surface this is this is critical in facilitating agreement.
And there's common interest there.
Absolutely.
Educational quality is a common interest.
Yeah. Exactly, and that's another thing. Once we get those interests, a lot of times we say, oh, we're both interested in that. Well, maybe that's what we could focus our attention on, and let's not get hung up on whether we're consolidating or not. We may come up with one or the other. We may come up with a different form of both that will enable us to do those, and oh, by the way, do some of these other things that are important to both of us too. Great observation. So why focus on interest? It gets to the heart of the issue. It moves people beyond polarized positions. And it diffuses a lot of the anger. All of a sudden, people are saying, "Oh, yeah, that really matters to me," and they'll start agreeing with the interest where they want to agree on the positions. It sets the stage for mutual understanding, and it leads to group cooperation.
Rick, take 5 more minutes. I can cut 5 easy.
Huh?
I can cut 5 minutes easy. You don't.
Oh, okay.
Go 10, 20. Does that help you?
Yeah, that'll help a little.
All right. Go 10, 30, Rick. I'll just take
No,
it.
10, 20 is good. Thank you. And it sets the stage for issue reframing. Because see, once I focus on interest, then all of a sudden the issue oftentimes changes. And we see it differently because we're not so dug into a position that has to be battled out. And then it sets the stage for generating creative options that we would not have thought about because we've been so locked into this predetermined position. Okay? Now the final thing we're going to look at is the importance of having a good process to help guide the dialogue and reaching agreement. This is a complex model that basically says, as you're looking at reaching agreement, make sure you define the issue first. What are we really here to try to agree upon or resolve or work through? And so you define the issue. And then the first thing that you do is you define also who's involved in this. Who are the people, you know, the school example I gave a minute ago, it's the teachers, it's the students, it's the school board, it's administration, et cetera. You define, you know, who are those people so that we make sure that as we're addressing this issue, we do not neglect one of the key people that are impacted by the issue. We want to keep those people in mind constantly. Then this model says the next thing to do is describe the sensory data, and those are facts. And the reason you start there is you can get agreement on facts a lot easier than ideas. So you want to find a way to build some agreement. Yeah, we all agree this issue is important. We really agree that we need to make sure we address things related to these people. We want to kind of have an idea of a good outcome that will move us forward on this issue. Now, what do we know about this issue? What's the history of it? And so, worked with a church one time that had declining enrollment. So we looked at the enrollment history of the church. We also compared it to other churches in that denomination. We also compared it to other churches outside the denomination. We also compared it to what's happening in that community. Is it a dying community? See, all of that data is important to think about. What do we do as a church, or what's happening here that's impacting our declining enrollment? You know, there's data here. Now, see, everybody has an idea. Well, it's because we need to get rid of the pastor. That's a position. Or we need to do this, we need to do that. But you start understanding all this. So you look at data, information that is relevant to the issue that you can get agreement upon. Everybody knows, yes, that is a fact. You know, this pastor was here from 1947 to 1955. That's a fact, right? So you start there. Then the next thing you do is you look at people's thoughts. And let me go to this one. This one kind of, yeah. You look at the history and the current actions. Then you look at the sensory data and facts. Then you look at people's thoughts, opinions. I believe this is the problem. You believe it's a different problem. You believe it's a different problem, okay? And here you're getting people's ideas, and you're saying to everybody, look, those ideas are not truth. You should know the truth shall make you free, but that's the truth. We have ideas and opinions. Yeah, whether they're the truth or not, yeah, someday we'll know. But we see through glass darkly, right? So we just have ideas. We have opinions. Some of us may be right, some of us may be wrong. I may be right this time, I may be wrong the next. And that's what you're getting. And you set the stage for that. You say, look, we're going to kind of move in and listen to everybody's opinion. And we're all going to have one. And they're going to be different. And hopefully we'll learn from each other's opinion. Someone may see it in a way that you don't. And that's going to inform us. So it's not, and we're not disagreeing with them. And so, you know, when Marcy shares her idea about it, we don't say, well, that's stupid, Marcy. I don't know why you came up with that. We're going to say, no, that's a good idea. I hadn't thought about that. May not agree with that, but that's a good idea. And we're going to collect all those ideas and all those opinions and all those beliefs, and we're going to be informed by that, okay? The next thing we do is we look at feelings. And we talk about, I'm angry about this problem. I'm scared to death of what we might do here. You know, I'm frustrated with things we've done in the past. And we get into feelings because feelings really matter, particularly about church, okay? And so I want to know how people feel in relation to this issue. And some people are going to be excited, and some people are going to be scared. And we need to know that and understand that. So basically and then we want to know what everybody wants. What do you want to see happen in relation to this issue? And see, this is all information. It's history, it's data, it's thoughts, it's feelings, and it's wants. And we all kind of bring different things to the table in that information. And this is what happened at Carolina, that situation at Carolina. We literally did this, and finally this guy said, you know, I can't hold on to my position anymore. I've learned something from someone else that causes me to see this differently. And when this happens best, every person in the room has changed. Every person in the room will have changed something about the way they see the issue. Or they'll have an idea that they've never had before. And if you facilitate this process well, you can see things happening and energy coming out of the discussion But you have to make sure that people are respectful, particularly of this piece and this piece and this piece. And then out of that, you generate options. Once you've generated those options to say we could do this, this, or this, we haven't, here's an option we knew about, here's two other options that we never thought of before. We generated those. Then you evaluate them. And part of the evaluation is how does it affect all of those stakeholders we identified as the first. We said school board, teachers, how does it affect all those parties? And is that a win for all of those parties? Does that make sense? So you're looking for an outcome that is going to meet the needs of the people involved in it. And that's when you would have reached agreement. And then I always try to encourage people to say, we agreed to this, and this looks like a great option for us. But let's come back 6 months from now and see how it's working. How are we going to evaluate how this works? We should see these things happen in 6 months. If they haven't happened, maybe we need to come back together and look for another solution. I'm done. And that's,
Can you go back to the one before that?
Yeah.
Because we can't read it on our page.
yeah, this one, again, I've taken and put it in bullet form, and it's basically called the collaborative team skill model. We actually was developed at Eastman with an outside consultant, and it'll walk you through this. I tell you what, Mike has these slides, so if he could print out the.
That one didn't print out as well, but maybe we can do a better job.
Okay. If not, let me know, Sissy, and I'll try to get another one too.
Okay.
But this model basically is covered in these steps here. The last thing I did have is just Covey's model of developing win-win agreements. It talks about the importance of having desired results, which is the purpose, having guidelines, which is the principles, resources, making sure that you look at, what can we bring to bear to solving this problem or addressing this issue, accountability, making sure you're clear about who does what. We reach this agreement, but when we walk out of this room, it's Rick's job to do this, and he's got to do this to make it successful. And then this final thing is consequences, and that's part of the follow-up. It's amazing how oftentimes you go into an agreement, if you come out of it, people look back and they, like Sally Ernest and I entered into an agreement in 1992 to do certain things together, okay? Didn't write it down, but it was a conversation, never will forget it. And as a result of that, we both were able to travel to about 17 different countries. We developed some things that I'm still doing with Leadership Kingsport after 20 years, and Leadership Greenville. And there's consequences to that win-win relationship that we developed as business, training associates, but friends also. And it just reinforces how, boy, when you can reach agreement and not make it about anything but trying to achieve something important, great things come out of it. And that's where, looking back on it and saying, gosh, what did we achieve beyond even what we thought we would achieve? It's good to remind yourself of that at times. Okay?
I just want to say one thing, and that is to thank you for including feelings in that list, because some of us approach things with feeling more than other ways. And I can come to a consensus once somebody's explained something to me, but I approach it with my emotion first. So I really appreciate you including it.
And see, and that's the thing about, if you think about that, again, I go back to Myers-Briggs. Data is a sensory type, thing on Myers-Briggs. Options is more about intuition. Thinking is more about thoughts, and feelings is more about feelings. So it really addresses kind of the diversity. So everybody in the room has a chance to pay attention to something that really matters to them.
Right.
And that helps that diversity. And that's where, make sure your process appeals to everybody. And that's kind of what that's done, is to make sure that everybody with widely different personalities can plug into that process in some way. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's wonderful. And you two have no idea. Did y'all talk? Because y'all brought up a lot of the same important starting places.
Reinforced us.
It reinforced one another. And thank you both very, very much. And we're going to have a journey in just a minute by our own Jim Welch, but I think Pat has a question to ask y'all.
I just need to be sure that all of you are set for May the 5th. We will leave the church at 8 o'clock. That means you will need to be here to get on the bus about 10 till 8, quarter till 8. depends on how slowly you get on the bus. So, but we should be back here by 6:30 on Saturday night. Some of you had asked me what time we would return. Some of us have something that we are supposed to be here for earlier than that, and I may take a car for those people who need to be back before that.
So
But
we're just going for the day? It's not
we are
like
going for the day, we're not spending the night. If you want to spend the night, feel free, just let me know. I don't need to save a place for you on the bus. But if you know that you are not going, please let me know. I'm gonna tell you that it's a great day, and with the way the class has been done this year, that's the day you all really get to spend some time together and talk about what you've done and learned, and just get to rehash things. And it's a wonderful time of fellowship as well as learning. We're not just going over there to play, so, but we will do a little bit of that.
One more thing I'd like to say, when Mike called me and told me about what y'all were doing, and I think this is wonderful. I think this is where we're about preparing leaders in the church. It's just a marvelous program, and that's one reason I said yes to doing this. But yeah, I've been involved with Leadership Kingsport, Leadership Greenville for the last 20 years or so, and seeing the results of that in the community over the years has been wonderful, and I hope you all see great results from this too. So thanks.
Thank you.